working okay? And as you're joining, if you'd like to type a question there in the chat, I would love to make sure that I can address that in the time that we have together today. I think we're good on recording. All right. So usually the way this works is there is inside of your student dashboards a link to a Google form where you can submit your questions in advance, and that gives me a little bit of time to collect my thoughts before we meet. Otherwise, I do take pauses throughout our live stream event to address the questions for those of you that are here joining me live. So please feel free to type your questions and comments and reflections as I go through, and I will take moments of pause to make sure that I address those. So I'm just going to pull up the first question that I had submitted here. Okay. So I have a question about why we attract certain partners. So if a partner with anxious attachment attracts someone with more of a disorganized attachment, how does this justify the expression, you don't attract what you want, you attract who you are? And is the only solution for attracting the right partners to become securely attached? Okay. So I believe that when we explore the dynamics of attraction alongside the principles of what I call soul-centered security, then we're really looking to uncover this kind of complex dynamic interplay between our desires, our fears, and really the essence of our being. And so this expression, you don't attract what you want, you attract who you are, kind of reflects this idea that our inner states, our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs, our emotions, the energy moving through our body acts as kind of a magnet, drawing in relationships and experiences that resonate with, I'm going to call it our current vibrational state, or let's call it energetic frequency. And so in the context of something like attachment theory, this can mean that someone who has more of an anxious attachment style subconsciously attracts a partner with a disorganized attachment style because their internal states, the way they are responding to the same fundamental wounding is complementary, right? They're just both, they are outwardly expressing different ways of coping with the same internal wounding. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to be identical in their thoughts, feelings, behaviors, or needs. Attachment styles are just a broad umbrella term for how we observe the way our nervous systems respond to a sense of threat and then seek safety, right? But what is operating on the vibratory level is the fundamental nature of the issue that drives something like disorganized attachment or anxious attachment, which I categorize as a self wound. Okay. And this is, of course, informed by our epigenetic inheritance, the environmental triggers in our experience, and the amount of conditioning, social conditioning that we received, and also the care that we received from our parents. So this is a varied soup that we are cooking up when we are looking at what goes into the realms of attraction, or what goes into attraction. So through the lens of what I call soul-centered security, we are really aiming for looking at securely attached, or this idea of being securely attached, as aligning with the definition of being compatible with your inner world, right? There's a sense of coherence with the spiritual self, the essence of your being, which I believe to be a big, brilliant ball of light, love, and compassion, that is truly the essence of each of us. And we have this light bulb inside of us, and it's always been there. And really what we are doing is we are engaging in a process of just wiping off the dust and grime and the gunk that may have been splattered on it over time and through these varied experiences, environmental triggers, epigenetic inheritance, so on and so forth. And so when we are looking to, let's say, shift the way we are feeling inside and coping with the way we're feeling inside, and then also we're looking to shift the types of partners that we are attracting, then that is going to require a deep dive into healing the parts of ourselves that are constricted around these old stories and old beliefs that became embodied over time, right? That became embodied enough that it led to a frequency of thought, feeling, and behavior that could be categorized by the outside world as an attachment style. So to my mind, this means that we're going to connect to our higher self or your spiritual self, and that's going to allow us to foster a sense of resiliency that can be difficult to access if we're only looking at it or looking for it through external validation. So in this sense, we're going to redefine security, and we're not going to view it as somehow, well, secure people must not be as anxious as me. So once I'm less anxious, then I'll be secure. Or they may not worry as much as me. So once I don't worry as much, then I'll be secure. So it's not necessarily about the absence or the presence of the worry. It is your relationship to it. It is how you hold that inner experience. It's how you orient yourself towards its function in your life. It's how you make meaning of it in your life. It's how much you allow it to become your identity. You allow it to kind of take over you. So it's really more about, to my mind, security is really more about not whether you have anxiety or not, but can you create more space, more conscious choice around the presence of it and understand it as a teacher for you in your lifetime and then regard it as such, which once you're able to do that, it loses some of it diffuses and loses some of its power anyway. So it's really more about relaxing into a type of self-acceptance and recognizing that that security really comes from an acceptance of this part of yourself. And, sometimes we get caught into that story about, I need to improve myself, so I stop being anxious. And so that just becomes what I call a double trouble, where you become aware of how anxious you are. And now you start beating yourself for beating yourself up, right? I'm anxious about how anxious I am. Oh, I need to stop doing that. I need to stop beating myself up. And now you're beating yourself for beating yourself up for beating yourself up, right? So it's just these very sophisticated parts that are taking in the information that you have learned and using it to fuel the mechanisms that were put into place a long time ago. And we have to celebrate those mechanisms and honor them and acknowledge the strengths that they afforded us before they can be integrated and reassigned. So oftentimes, we might talk about grief and loss and healing, which are all these three things that often happen in tandem together when we choose to go on a process of self-discovery. We often talk about these things as, in some ways, trying to be less of this and more of that. But really what we're doing is we're trying to be accepting of all of it and just reorient ourselves in relationship to it. So this kind of invites us to lean into the discomfort a little bit, not as a relentless pursuit to become better, but really in a pursuit to become more understanding, to relax, to unfold into ourselves. Some words I might use for that. So this can be, so we're just trying to root our sense of self and identity in a place of self-awareness. We're trying to ground into a place of self-awareness and self-allowance. And so that means that every secure person is going to look different. There will be all different shades of gray when it comes to our secure folks. And if we are defining it as being more connected to the essence of your being and being able to take that spacious pause before we allow our impulses to take over, right? I hope that helps answer that question. And of course, for those of you that are here live, I would love to know if you have any questions popping up as well. Another question. Do cheaters ever come back? Okay. Not an easy one, but we will tackle this one. Okay. Sometimes I get this question in addition to other questions like, do cheaters miss their ex? When do cheaters realize that they made a mistake? Do they ever realize what it is that they lost? Do they still love me? Questions like that. And I think that, this really kind of opens the door to a lot of nuances, challenging nuances for understanding what goes into feelings of remorse and what might be the path to healing if you're looking to reconcile with someone where there was infidelity. And so I think it's important to realize that there can be a behavior that you observe, but there may be varied intentions, motivations, and values that go into what appears to be a similar behavior, right? So first, we would really need to take a look at defining what do we mean by cheating, right? So obviously the term infidelity is going to encompass a wide range of different types of actions and behaviors that someone might do. It could mean that you stepped outside of the relationship in a sexual way. It could mean that you had an emotional affair. There could be other definitions for cheating. And so when we're talking about you cheated, what we're really, for our purposes, let's define that as cheating in a romantic context, because that tends to be my niche. And also that it consists of behaviors that break a spoken or unspoken contract within a committed relationship. And that involves overt and covert forms of lying and deception to hide our behavior because we anticipate that there are negative consequences, right? Now, there are some interesting statistics on cheating. I think one of them was statistic I read recently said that 25% of all married couples report infidelity at some point. And historically, usually it has been men that cheat more than women. They did a study on that in the 90s, but then in the past 20 years, they did another study that shows that that number has become neck and neck these days. And I think it is because increasing number of women in the workforce, financial freedom and autonomy, so on and so forth. So there are some statistics on cheating, but of course, this is not the type of thing that everyone is going to answer honestly on a questionnaire. So there's also some statistics that say that they think cheating is more prevalent than it is actually reported. But it's important to realize that, again, the cheating behavior or being unfaithful or committing infidelity, again, it's going to depend on how you're defining it in the context of your relationship. And also it's going to come from different motivations, right? There's going to be different motivations that go into that behavior. So for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to outline what I consider to be different types, different reasons and motivations that we might cheat. So the first one I'm going to call is the opportunist, because it's probably the easiest one to define. So this is someone who cheats really just because the opportunity presented itself, right? Usually it's not someone who is seeking out that kind of interaction. It's usually more that they kind of succumb to temptation in the moment. It was a moment of weakness, that kind of thing. They are responding more to the circumstances, and it's less of a reflection of like deep-seated feelings about their partner or the nature of their relationship. Now, let's say someone finds out about it or their guilt eats them up and they feel like they have to tell their partner. They usually will feel remorseful. It will be a lapse in judgment, and there is opportunity for reconciliation depending on how well they handle that process of taking ownership and accountability for their behavior and creating repair. I do have a video on that topic about how to get your ex back, 4 soulful steps. So if that's of interest to anyone, I'll leave a link to that in the replay of this video. Now, the second one is the validation seeker. And so this is someone who's really seeking emotional connection, right? They are the folks who feel like there is something missing in their relationship. And so they are seeking emotional affairs because they're looking to have their cup filled, right? They feel like there's something missing. There's a longing for understanding. There's a longing for intimacy. There's a longing for validation. And so the likelihood of them, feeling remorseful or missing their ex, if it does lead to a breakup, is probably going to be deep. And there may also be some complicated grief involved there, because sometimes for the validation seeker, they may also be participating in unfaithful behaviors because they kind of want to be caught. They kind of want this to be the way that they communicate that what they want truly from their partner, and they're not getting it. And so by going and seeking it elsewhere, sometimes this can be a way of seeking attention from the partner they're actually cheating on. So this is the validation seeker. Then we have the serial cheater. So this is someone who's really more of a repeat offender. They usually are not too remorseful about it. It's usually not about their commitment or issues of self-esteem. It's kind of more compulsive. It's sort of about, can I, right? Can I do this? And sometimes it can also be about control. There's some level of control, their ego being sort of fluffed up and inflated by the behavior. And this is, it's a little bit sort of overlaps with the opportunist. It's kind of like doing this because it's available and it puffs me up in some way. Sometimes there can be an element of compulsivity to it, but if that's the case, then it's probably overlapping with another type, right? So we would want to dig into the motivations behind that. But this is someone who could, on the surface, appear to be really remorseful, but then they just go and do it all over again. So there may also be a level of narcissistic wounding involved with this particular type. Then we have the thrill seeker. So the thrill seeker, they're really drawn to exhilaration, right? Particularly the danger of getting caught, which is kind of central to their motivation for cheating. So these are folks that crave the adrenaline high that comes from the forbidden or the possibility of discovery. And so it's not really about seeking out a new partner. It's really about the thrill of doing something naughty, right? And going against the grain. And so if we think about it, their primary relationship then becomes essential, not only for the emotional value, but because it sets the stage for the thrill-seeking behavior to be possible, right? So there is no risk of being caught. There is no risk of betraying unless you have someone to catch you, right? Unless there is someone there to create that tension. So because there's kind of a dual motivation there, their motivations can be somewhat multi-layered, right? If they may come to miss their ex, and it doesn't mean that they're not going to value their partner for other reasons. That doesn't necessarily exclude valuing their partner for other reasons. But if they are this type of cheater, then there is this other element involved. And that is, it means that the relationship is necessary in order to experience the type of arousal they're seeking. Which means that they may become a serial cheater if they feel it's necessary to maintaining the relationship itself. Then we have the exit strategist. Now, the exit strategist, this is someone who uses cheating as a means to an end. Now, this is someone who's not necessarily looking to get caught because they want attention. They're looking to get caught because they don't know how to end the relationship any other way. And so rather than confronting the issue directly and breaking off the relationship, they really cheat as a way to force a conclusion to the relationship. Well, they could never forgive me for this, so I better do it, right? Because then they won't try to get me back. There was a, I don't know how many of you might have seen the show True Detective, but in the first season of True Detective on HBO, there's a scene where Woody Harrelson's wife, he is a serial cheater, and Woody Harrelson's wife wants to divorce him, but he always fights to get her back. And so she goes and cheats on him with his partner because she knows it was too deep of a wound for him to forgive. And so in this case, we see that those two, even though they cheated on each other, cheated for very different reasons, right? And seeking very different outcomes. So do they come back? Well, it depends on what's their motivation for cheating. It also depends on how do they feel about their own unfaithful behavior, right? And the type of infidelity that they performed is going to inform that. And yes, they will come back. And I would say, if they do, then really what you want to consider now is the level of remorse that they express, making sure that you still have the same values and priorities in the relationship, making sure that you're really defining what it means to be unfaithful in your relationship and not just making assumptions. Maybe you want to change the contract of your relationship, right? Maybe there's something that you want to change about it in the way that you relate to each other that makes more room for what they were seeking in being unfaithful, or maybe makes more room for you to ask for something. So I think it really becomes a matter of having a real heartfelt conversation and being as honest as you can be with each other about what you need and want. Now, if it's a serial cheater or a thrill seeker, they may not be totally honest because part of what they get out of the behavior is the dishonesty. Part of that is what's arousing about it. So in that case, listen to what they have to say, but then pay attention to their behaviors. And does anything shift about the way that they've behaved? And if you feel like you start seeing the same type of behaviors creeping up, you're not going to be able to have that honest conversation with them. You're going to have to make decisions for yourself in that case. So I hope that answers that question. I'm just going to pause and ask if any of this is resonating with those of you that are hearing me on the call. If there are any other questions coming up, I just want to make sure I'm acknowledging you here. We're streaming in 2 places. Okay. All right. Let's see, what else do we have? How to give an avoidant partner space without worrying about being inconsistent or upsetting them. Okay. So really the best way to avoid worrying about upsetting someone else is getting really comfortable with your own upset feelings. So you ask them clarity about what space means to them. Well, they're asking for space. So ask for clarity. What does that mean? Does that mean no text messaging? Does that mean no phone calls? Does that mean we're not going to see each other in person? If so, for how long? When can is it possible to have a sense of when we'll be in touch again? Because that would put me at ease. I'm totally okay giving you space, but it would help put me at ease to know when I might hear from you again, even if it's to tell me you need more space, right? And it's okay to ask for that. And if they're not willing to meet you on that level, then there's a piece of them that's kind of resistant and not really willing to contribute to your well-being as much as their own. And that is something that we really need in a relationship in order for it to succeed, is for both partners to be willing to meet at least halfway so that you both can feel safe while giving each other the other what it is that they need, right? So if they say, if you ask for clarity about what space means to them and they tell you, then just simply do that as long as you're comfortable with it. Well, I need a couple of days to clear my head. I'll send you a text on Sunday in the afternoon. And maybe it is to reconnect. Maybe it's to say I need more time, but either way, you will hear from me. So now you know. Now, let's say they say that they want space and you're okay with it, but then they contradict themselves by saying that they're upset that you did what they said. And then meaning they ask for space, but then they get mad because you gave them space. No, you're supposed to fight for me. No, you're supposed to call me even though I told you not to. Right. So there's a contradiction that reveals a glaring contradiction between what they're expressing outwardly and what they're feeling inwardly, and how honest they're willing to be about their inner states and how mature they are in being able to communicate openly and effectively in the relationship. And so some of that you can be of assistance. The only way that you can really be of assistance in that is cleaning up your communication. So this with avoidant partners, this includes soft strategies. With anxious partners, this includes safe strategies. This means using language that is accurate to the feelings that you're having, as opposed to language that describes feelings as evaluations of other people. So for example, soft strategies respect someone's autonomy and expresses appreciation, whereas safe strategies reassure someone of connection and give clear stipulations for when you will connect again, that kind of thing. Whereas, and if we're looking at evaluations versus real feeling words, so the example I usually give is we say something like, I'm abandoned, or I feel dismissed, or I feel unseen, or I feel unloved. All of those are words that describe somebody else's behavior towards you. They don't actually describe the feeling you're having inside your own mind and body. So what is the feeling of dismissed, abandoned, unseen? What is that? What describe that energy to me? What color is it? How does it feel in your body? Well, I feel lonely. I feel vacant. I feel hollow. I feel disconnected. So you can say that. And even though that's a painful thing to hold, you've just recentered yourself inside your own body. And now there's room for them to come towards you. When you say something like, I feel abandoned, there's always an invisible by you on the end of that sentence. And we're doing this. And so it pushes them away by you. And we're pushing them away. We say, I feel hollow. I feel vacant. I feel disconnected. And it would help me if blank. And I love it when you do blank. Is there any way that you'd be willing to do more of blank with me? Is there any way that you'd be willing to explore more of blank so that we can figure this out together, right? It's all about curiosity and invitation. So if they're saying, well, you should fight for me, I've heard this also from other students. Well, they told me that I shouldn't listen to them when they do this, or they told me that I should fight for them when they do that. They're asking a lot of you. They're asking you to be their therapist. They're asking you to be the parent that they never had. Well, I want you to let me tantrum and then just let me rail against you. And then you need to come and comfort me and so on and so forth. Okay. There are instances where that can happen in relationships, and it doesn't mean it's a dysfunctional relationship necessarily. But to say that sort of unilaterally, I'm going to act this way and you need to bypass what I'm showing and telling you and do something different for me, is they're just absolving themselves of their own responsibility, their own personal responsibility, and what they need to be doing for themselves to show up as an equal partner for you. Okay. So I don't accept that. I wouldn't accept that. And I would explore that more with them. It doesn't mean that you can't, it can be what they want. And we can explore, why do you want that? What makes you think that you couldn't just show up in the ways that you needed to? What makes you distrust yourself that you couldn't just say what you needed to say? Which is, instead of me forcing my way past what you're telling me or your boundaries, simply telling me, I feel like I want to push you away now, but I know I really don't want to do that. Right? So in some ways, that's how we function as, that's how we call our partners to step into their power, by trusting the power that they have. And that's how we call our partners into trusting themselves, by trusting that they have the authority to do these things for themselves. And when we try to step into becoming the caring parent to their tantruming child, we step into their projections. And then what will happen is those projections will play out as they did. Right? Sometimes we can relive in order to revise, but there has to be conscious awareness around that, and there has to be intentionality around it. Otherwise, we just keep doing it over and over and over again. And so maybe it's uncomfortable for them when you say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm willing to talk to you about why you might say something like that to me. But if you tell me that you want space and then you get mad at me because I gave it to you, that's a mixed signal. And that's going to lead to confusion and insecurity and feeling unsafe in this relationship for me. So I'm not going to do that. When I see you backing away, I'll double check, but that's as far as it goes. You are going to have to be responsible for showing up and telling me how you feel and what you're feeling and why you're feeling it. And then we'll have a conversation. Right? Maybe that's uncomfortable for them. In fact, it's probably going to be really uncomfortable for them. Right? But it's also really good and important work for them to be doing and for you to be doing, because you're setting your boundary in that moment. And I would say, don't enable them. Don't steal away that opportunity by trying to appease their feelings or step in and become the love that they never had. because you're trying to give the love that you never got, right? Because you're not going to get it that way. And sit with the discomfort they're having and the discomfort that you are having, because that's how you are going to become the master of your emotions. That's how you are going to become the one in charge, right? And that's a win-win for everyone, because it means now everybody has permission to feel all their feelings, not just the happy, good, pleasant, acceptable ones, right? And once you all have permission to feel all your feelings, that's when we start making space for everybody's reality to exist. And we stop bulldozing over each other and the boundaries that we might have. And we start building trust in ourselves. And once we build trust in ourselves, now we trust that we can show up to a relationship in such a way that we don't need someone else to be in charge of us, so to speak, which makes us subject to the whims of other people, which we can't control. All right, I hope that was helpful. Let's see. Here's another one. Do avoidants have trouble planning dates? Our relationship is good, but he cannot seem to plan a date. Okay, so there are a lot of contributing factors to a situation like that. And it's, based on the information provided, it's impossible to determine if that's because of an attachment concern. But I will say performance anxiety can stem from attachment anxiety. But if there is some element of planning itself, like the act of planning, that is particularly difficult for this person, we might also consider there's an issue of neurodivergence or attention deficit going on. So if the symptoms and experience of having neurodivergence growing up led to some negative attention, meaning they were punished or there were evaluative assumptions of their character going on that made relationships unsafe for them, like somebody called them lazy or stupid or disorganized, or said they were misbehaving for no reason, or they were just being oppositional and defiant, when they were actually struggling with some level of neurodivergence, then in that case, we now layer on top of that certain internal ideas and beliefs that they adopt themselves about themselves and who they are and what their character is and their own traits. And those ideas could lead to things like insecure attachment narratives. I'm not okay. The world is unsafe. Relationships are unsafe. I'm so stupid. I'm lazy. I'm disorganized. I'm this, I'm that. I'm not a good boy. I'm not a good girl, right? So now we have an organic issue, and so in this case, maybe there's neurodivergence going on, and then we have the attachment issue layer on top of it. So I would not be able to answer this without being able to evaluate the person on like a psychosocial assessment, for example. So in that case, I'd recommend, if you're noticing that everything else seems to be good, but there's a struggle with planning dates, and it's specifically about the planning part, then you'd have to ask a few more questions and maybe do an evaluation to make sure that that is, that there's not an underlying organic issue going on. Let's see. Okay, so why do avoidants dislike the word I love you? My boyfriend feels uncomfortable saying or hearing it from other people. Okay, so we did a video on this recently. So for many people that have avoidant attachment style, and I might also add fearful avoidant attachment style, the words I love you are often distorted. So either they've encountered people who were in love with the idea of being in love, and so their partners say those words really early on in the relationship. And so they feel like once they start saying things like that to them, that they're no longer perceiving them for who they are, or and that they're just seeing them as some kind of character in a fantasy that they're trying to play out. You're just in love with the idea of being in love. You don't know me well enough to know that. And I think this is because there's often a misperception that avoidant people don't feel very deeply, or they don't, they're too aloof. But I think it's because an avoidant person perceives commitment profoundly. They see commitment as a profound thing. And because of that, they are commitment phobic, not because of their disrespect for commitment, but because of their profound respect for commitment. And most of the avoidant people that I know, when they commit wholeheartedly, but sometimes they struggle with having the tools to perform that commitment adequately. And so this is where all the insecurities around fear and performance issues and anxiety come up a lot. And so my point is, when people say I love you too early, then they kind of pull back, maybe for the fear of commitment, but it's really more for feeling like this person doesn't understand what commitment is. And if they did, they wouldn't say this to me, which means they don't see me for who I am, which means they're operating from a place of fantasy. And I don't know how much I want to participate in a fantasy right now. The second part of this is sometimes those words can be used as an excuse for misbehavior, for boundary violations, on the level of emotional, physical, or mental boundaries. So people, I know in my upbringing, there was an expression, I love you means never having to say you're sorry. And like, you should just know, if you love someone, then you'll just have this magical way of understanding and knowing that I'm sorry, and you should just know it and get over it. And so oftentimes, the nature of our relationships can be used to excuse stepping and tramping over somebody else's boundaries. And so but I love you. It justifies those things. So when the words have been abused in that way, when you hear them, it's going to trigger negative associations and memories, right? Of course, avoidant folks may also have not experienced a very loving environment. And so in cutting themselves off from bad feelings, they may also cut themselves off from good feelings. And so they may not really know what those words mean to them. And so in general, it becomes kind of suspect. Like, you don't really know what that means. And someone starts saying it. Well, now there's a whole set of experiences and expectations around what that might mean that you don't really have an understanding of, right? And so sometimes with avoidant partners, I usually recommend finding another way to say it and just waiting for them to be the first ones to say it, because they feel inspired enough to. And because, there's so many other ways that you can express the sentiment. Love is an energy moving through your body. The words I love you are just sounds that we collectively agree as a society, we assign to that energy. But you can find other words and sounds to express that feeling. So for example, especially expressing it through your actions, really all the better with someone who's more avoidant, because they're usually not very chatty, just generally speaking. But I would say, for example, with avoidant partners, I usually recommend just saying, I feel like I can be myself around you. I feel like the best version of myself shows up when we're together. And usually they like that, because to them, that's what love is. Right? It's about being the best version of yourself. And they like that idea. So those are the ways that I'd recommend telling an avoidant partner you love them, through words like that and through actions, and then wait for them to say it first. Let's see. Got a little more time here. Let's see what else. Okay. Why does he say he only feels friend feelings, but then does everything that a lover would do? Okay. So I can't know the answer to this for sure, but I can venture a guess, and that it's probably due to some level of boundary confusion. So when we have not been taught to properly identify our feelings, or to understand what is romantic passion versus what is friendship, because they're not the same thing, but it is really delicious when they overlap and when they occur simultaneously. But when we don't understand there is a distinction, we can slip into occupying one role without really identifying the other, even when we are expressing them, right? And on the other hand, there can also be a part of us that doesn't want to label the behavior as such, because maybe that triggers a variety of expectations that we are afraid it could be easy to fail, right? Well, I know how to be a friend. I don't really know how to be a boyfriend. And so I'm going to show up in this way, and that should be enough. That needs to be enough. And so for some, performing that role is more than enough, right? Acting as if can be more than enough for some. We don't need to label it. We don't need to touch all that fear that comes with labels. But for others, the label is really important because it's about being claimed. It's about being acknowledged. And so what's important to acknowledge in this case, underlying whether it is the need to reject labels or the desperately grasping for them, we want to look at what safety are our parts seeking, the parts that are rejecting or the parts that are reaching for, because both of those parts are probably vibing at the same frequency around the same wound, just in equal and opposite ways, right? I know that in my own experience, the status or the label of a relationship, I never really sought. And I wasn't usually one who wanted that and would wait for the other person to kind of define it first. And that was often because I didn't really know what that meant. And so the lack of clarity really dissuaded me from seeking clarity. Because once you define something, then it's a clear yes or no. But if you don't define it, then you can hang out in this space where you're getting some of what you need. And so things kind of you can coast a little bit, right? So if you're someone who feels like you want a definitive yes or no, you're going to have to ask for it, you know? So if you appreciate all that he's doing, but you want that label, because for you, that label means you get clarity, and clarity is something you want, and you're going to ask for it. And if you feel like he's doing something that extends beyond the bounds of friendship, and because of that, it crosses into one of your boundaries for a relationship, even if it's a kind gesture or a generosity, don't accept it, because it crosses over into what you allow in romantic partnership, not in friendship, or only in friendship, let's say, right? So you got to kind of feel into that. Incidentally, I did get over that and am now engaged to my partner. So it definitely came up with a yes with a lot of clarity. Okay. Next one. Okay. This will probably be the last one we do. I miss him and I keep looking for that chemistry. How to end this loop of wanting them when they left me. Okay, so 3 things. Number 1, I might say try redefining chemistry, that word chemistry, as an arousal state that is driven by adrenaline and dopamine highs, usually accompanied by self-projections, right? So you want to ask yourself, what did this relationship show me about myself and the way that I love? Okay. Secondly, I would have you notice, what are the stories coming up in your mind about your lovability, your self-worth, your desirability in the absence, in their absence and rejection of you in the relationship, right? So where and how can I learn to love myself more? Or another way of saying this is, where was I sacrificing parts of myself in this relationship, right? Thirdly, you want to look at the beliefs about that you are holding around reality in general, and how perhaps staying in a grief state is rewarding you or protecting you in some way. So I came to talking about attachment by way of writing a book about complicated grief. And one of the interesting things that I found in that research was they did a lot of studies on people who experience what we call normal grief, which over time tends to abate, and people who experience what we call complicated grief, which does not abate, and it does not respond to treatments for things like depression, anxiety. It's persistent and pervasive. And what they found was individuals who have complicated grief, when they think about their attachment figures, the parts of their brain, even though they are expressing a pain state, the parts of their brain associated with pain and pleasure light up. Whereas for folks that experience normal grief, it was the pain part of the brain that would light up, and over time it would become titrated. Over time it would soften, right? It wouldn't be so poignant. So now this is why we have to take a look at, well, that lets us know that there's something about that grief process that is creating some kind of reward, that there's something rewarding about our pain state. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the reward that I'm experiencing? Another way to look at that is, how am I continuing to reject love and reject myself by clinging to this person, right? Or clinging to fantasies of what could have been. Sometimes I think normal grief is like mourning the loss of something you had. Complicated grief is mourning the loss of something you never had, and now you're afraid you never will, right? And so staying in that grief state, there's something there that's keeping you safe. Oftentimes it is because the thoughts of the partner, although it causes you pain, it still makes you feel connected to them, right? But by remaining connected to them, you're still rejecting some part of yourself. There will be folks who sometimes hold on to their grief and their pain because they think that if I let go of this, then I'm betraying love. If I let go of this pain, then I'm betraying the love for them, and I'm betraying love in general. And of course, the only way you can betray love is by punching yourself off from it, right? And so the only way you can honor love is by letting more love in. So allowing that grief process to run its course is allowing love in, right? And so once you start asking yourself these types of questions, there is another part, a deeper, more spiritual part, let's say, that I would argue probably attracted this relationship so that you would experience this kind of pain. Let's call it a catalytic experience, to knock you out of it. Was that the expression? Snap you out of it, right? To snap you out of it, so that you can start to attend to and answer these questions, right? Which will, once you find those answers, now it's going to allow you to make space for and stop pinching off the love that you're really seeking, because the request you've made is probably a request for a massive energetic flow, right? You've requested a soul deep love. That is a massive energetic flow of energy that you are seeking. And so we need to address the areas where you may be pinching yourself off from that in order to let it in. And once you do that, then what happens is that grief actually made a lot of space for something much more fulfilling and satisfying to come in, right? So I hope that's helpful. Okay. So those are the questions that we had. I just want to check if there are any other questions popping up in our chat. Just want to acknowledge those. Thank you, Laura. I'm glad that that resonates with you. Okay. All right. Well, thank you to those of you that joined me here today. I so appreciate you joining me live. And once again, for those of you that are new, we pop in twice a month, usually, to come and answer questions as they're coming up in your courses and in your materials. You can post questions in the Facebook group and tag me. You can also, inside your student dashboard, there will be a link to submit them on a Google form in advance. That just gives me a little time to collect my thoughts before we hop on. And with that, I think we'll bring our call to a close for today. And the next call will be the third Thursday of the month, same time, same place. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.